Okay, George, I'm just going to start it off with this. Why would someone want to start a podcast in this day and age?
You know, the original reason that I wanted to start my podcast for me was to be able to get the word out on some of the platforms that I have built through my business. But it's a funny thing that since I have launched my podcast, it has become so meaningful to me because you really get to know the people that you're touching. You really get to speak to your audience and really discover that they need some of this content. You know what I mean? They need what you're putting out there, especially when it's a topic like leadership for me or for what you do with the Golden Mike podcast. It's necessary, if that makes sense.
Yeah, why is it necessary?
It's necessary because, you know, for me on this whole leadership platform, it's all about my definition of leadership, which is in its very most basic way, it's that person that will stand up and says, I will do it. I'll do it. That's leadership to me. And for me, being able to get on this platform and share stories of unconventional leadership from other leaders, stories that wouldn't necessarily be heard, it's giving a voice to those that have not been heard. It's giving a platform for people to be able to get up onto a stage, whether it's a virtual stage or not, and just say what they feel, say what's important to them, talk about potentially an idea that they have to change the world. And if I didn't provide this platform for those leaders to get up there and speak, would they be heard? You know, and so for me, it becomes this responsibility of giving this platform to other people in order for them to be heard.
So what makes doing a podcast and using that format different from, like a live stream or something else, a YouTube channel? Why a podcast?
Well, a podcast in its very essence is more broad ranging. You know, anything that you're doing on the internet has the potential to reach a ridiculous number of people. But when you're broadcasting over your own social media, at a certain point, it only provides a finite number of people that you could potentially reach. A podcast going out on multiple platforms, knowing that you're in the directory that some of these major podcasts are in. You're in the Apple Podcast directory, the Spotify directory, the iHeartRadio and TuneIn directory. People could look up your genre. People can look up what you're about, not you specifically, but say they just put in leadership into a podcast search and you could come up and you could potentially now reach somebody that there was no way, shape, or form that you could have reached this person in any other way other than by just being a podcast, by having this platform. So I think that's why it's the most important platform out there in terms of putting a show out there. A lot more powerful than doing a live social media show or even sometimes a YouTube show, because when you think about the logistics of putting on a podcast versus a video show, you know, you could potentially do both, as I do with my platform. But hey, man, it's just you and a microphone and your ideas. And it's that simple to get them out there.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I did over 200 lives, and um, I built a pretty nice following on that, and I also got to groom my voice doing those live streams. But something that I found different when I moved over to the podcast format, and one of the reasons I wanted to move to the podcast format is, number one, is the accessibility. Someone I mean, if someone wants to watch your live stream, they basically need to be in front of a computer and sit there for a while. Where someone can be listening to your podcast on a commute, someone can be listening on a run, someone can be, someone can be shopping and listening to your podcast. And I also think one of the things that makes podcasts very different from anything else is it's one of the most intimate situations. I mean, you're right up in someone else's ear, right? And to be able to be using this microphone, which is one of the most dangerous and empowering instruments out there, is really something that I think anyone with an idea, anyone that has a passion in something, can totally explore. Um, one of a thing that I really love about podcasts are things that, as long as you're passionate about what it is that you're talking about, other people start getting passionate about it. I don't know if this has happened to you, but like I've done like random play, and I got into caving, like, and I was immersed in these two guys talking about going into caves, and the whole show was about caves. But number one is they had huge sponsors, and then like number two, they were making a living about doing and talking about what they love. They were going into caves, telling us what they saw, and then afterwards I was like, I want to go into a cave if I wasn't so like scared of like the dark and small spaces. So is there anything that you wanted to add on that piece with sort of the beauty of the podcast platform?
Yeah, for sure. It's, it's funny because podcasts have been around really for a long time. I remember hearing about podcasts super early in the process when they were available on iTunes. And it was kind of this thing that was like, yeah, okay, there's probably some boring stuff out there that people are putting up there. And, they're doing it as a way for just their voice to be heard. And then all of a sudden it became a viable platform. And you look at people out there that have really been married to the concept of a podcast. You look at a guy like Joe Rogan, okay? Joe Rogan, who was, when you go back early in his career, Joe Rogan is a stand-up comic. And not many people really know that because of what he's turned into. He was a stand-up comic that got lucky enough to get on a TV show called News Radio with Phil Hartman and Andy Dick and a whole bunch of other people. And that show ended, and then Joe Rogan kind of disappears. And then all of a sudden he resurfaces in the MMA world as an announcer years later. And then all of a sudden, because his voice is out there, he becomes a legitimate voice in the MMA world, not as just an announcer, but an expert in the field. And because of that platform, he gets on to a podcast. He creates the Joe Rogan Experience because, hey, people want to listen to me. I'm Joe Rogan, and, there's some form of legitimate information coming out of my mouth, and let me just get on here and just start interviewing people. And the show really had no specific format other than just to be an interview show. And Joe was an authentic and honest guy. He's got a good way about him, very simple interview format. He does get to the core of things. And all of a sudden, this guy becomes the biggest thing in podcasting. And now,
I mean, he's what, coming on 2,000 episodes now? Like, I mean,
yeah.
or has he surpassed?
And I don't
ridiculous.
know if you heard the news yesterday, but Joe Rogan signed an exclusive Spotify deal yesterday. He's moving the show off of all platforms. They are going to Spotify exclusively. He signed $100 million deal with Spotify. And so
and he's talking about what he likes to talk about.
Yeah. And the cool thing is with that is I am sure that initially, before podcasting became a business, I'm sure that initially it was just, hey, I can't land another show. I haven't been able to land a show. I'm doing this whole UFC announcing thing. Let me just get out there somewhere where it's very simple for me to get out there and put my voice out there. And all of a sudden, now the business end crept in for him because he was doing what he loved. He's just interviewing people, having great conversations, having some laughs. And all of a sudden the business end creeps in where people are listening, and then sponsors are going, hey, I want to be involved.
Yeah.
Hey, here's some money, advertise my product. And not only did he become one of the top podcasters, but he is, I'm pretty sure, the top paid podcaster out there as well. You got to fact check me on that. But
yeah.
And now all of a sudden it's now not only providing him this creative outlet, but it's a career. It's paying his bills. That's incredible to me.
It's completely a career, and I wanted to talk about that for a second. There's that passion piece, but then there's also, for some people like doing this just as a hobby,
Yeah.
and then other people have found that kind of have stumbled forward into, whoa, this can take care of a couple bills here and there. I know for both you and I, we started off partly mostly because we love leadership and we love positive psychology and stories and interviewing, and the type of format and same type of people inspire us. But also at the same time, for you, you started getting sponsors. Talk about that.
Yeah, it was the craziest thing, man. Again, the impetus for this was because I was launching a new coaching platform and I wanted to get ahead of the game. I wanted to develop a podcast platform that could build an audience that was specifically geared towards leadership and learning about unconventional leadership, how other leaders out there got their start and the journeys they went on in order to become the leaders they are today. And I'm gonna have to give myself a little tiny pat on the back here. And I think it's a good show. I think I'm pretty good at
Yeah, it's
doing
a great show.
interviews.
Yeah.
And when you know that your content is good and when you're putting the work into it, you're putting the research into it, you're putting the effort into providing not only just good content, but content that's worthy of your brand, who you are, all of a sudden people start listening, and not only audience members. And so I started getting approached about sponsorships for the show, sponsorship opportunities. And we're still in our infancy, man. We started the podcast in December. And so now we're about, 5 months into this thing, but we are consistently sponsored on a weekly show. We have sponsorships right now lined up through mid-June for every single show.
Wow.
And it's become a very surprising revenue source as well. Something I never expected, and it wasn't part of the business plan or the goal structure, but you can be damn sure that it is now,
Yeah. Now, what do you have to say to anyone who's listening right now, and they're like, oh man, I'd love to start a podcast, but a plan, doing the research, putting myself out there, to a sea of other podcasts where Rogan is like a 1 in 100 million shot of what he has, and hey George, you already have a successful business, and I'm not that type of person, like this. I don't even have that kind of time. What would you say to someone who's like kind of going through the idea of it, but like, man, the execution of it is just too much planning. It's too much competition. It's too much research. It's too much effort.
I think it lies in the first thing that you said about Rogan being a 1 in 1 million shot. I think that when we really look at that and discover that that's not true at all, sure, the success portion of it could be a 1 in 1 million shot. There is some luck sometimes that's involved in that. I'm not a big believer in that. I know the work that Joe Rogan puts into his show. I've heard a ton of interviews about this. I know the work that the great Howard Stern put into his show over the years, that Elvis Duran and the morning show have put in to become syndicated on iHeartRadio. I know the work that they have put into it, the planning, the structuring, the attention to the audience, the attention to the content, the attention to the sticking to a through line and a genre in order to please your audience and to make sure that your mission is still prevalent in your show. And so when you think about these people that are super successful, what's the through line between all these shows? Is that they put the effort and the research in. And when they really sat down and said, I'm going to do this thing and I have a plan and I'm going to work my ass off until I succeed, they did it. Now, I can probably name a bunch of failure stories along with the success stories. I don't know the work ethic of the failures. You know, sure, some of them I'm sure put the effort into it, but when you go into a show like this and you come in with a plan, you come in with all the information in hand, you are prepared with your show format, your genre, your staffing, your or whatever you want to call it, co-hosts, your equipment, the technical specs, every single thing involved in building a podcast. Yeah, sure, it takes time. Sure, you have to go to a source that can really bring you the right information, and not only in terms of the technical side, but the content side of things.
Right.
When you go to a source like this and do the work, do the pre-work required of putting together a platform like this, I can guarantee you that it will at least be a success to you in terms of sticking to, you know, what is reflective of your brand. You know, the success and honesty that your brand reflects. And through that, once you are honest to your brand and authentic to your audience, and you're putting the work in, I could probably say 9 times out of 10 that you will have some semblance of success.
Yeah, I fully agree with you on that. Part of this game, if you want to call it that, is just showing up. It's just showing up on a regular basis for people, right? Building your voice. You know, my go around with my podcast was I wanted people to hear my flubs. I wanted people to hear where I was getting flustered, and I'd be like, oh man, I don't know what to ask next. You know, I wanted the audience to grow with me. And it's one thing, I think metrics are huge, absolutely huge, to see the growth, the listenership, what countries, the demographics. And also at the same time, if you're using something like Pareto's principle, the 80-20 principle, out of that number of people, about 20% will be these super fans, and they're raving super fans, and they'll look for you, and they'll look up more episodes for you. They'll put you on loop, and with those raving super fans, you don't need more than a handful to really get your podcast up and running, getting some great feedback and testimonials. You don't need the thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands. Now, it's one thing if you're looking at things like sponsorship, but it's another thing if you're looking to build a community around your podcast, which is the direction I wanted to go in. Also, at the same time, there's resources out there. There's you and I who have done the research. We've done the lives. We've looked at all the equipment. And in many ways, we made it easy for a lot of people who are interested in getting into something that's really, for me, very, very, very rewarding. Now, for you, George, what has been the most I'm going to ask you 2 different questions. What has been the most rewarding part of this podcast experience for you?
One of them, there's probably 2 answers to that. One of them does lie in the metrics a little bit, but not in an I win kind of way, right? Like, look at my numbers. More of, wow, like I am reaching so many people, and I know how good this content is for people. I know that people that are desperate for the answer to how can I become a leader, when they listen to this on a consistent basis, there is a story being told throughout each episode. Mm-hmm. There's a through line here of leadership in my show particularly. And so when I look at my metrics, and by my 20th episode, we had hit over 25,000 listens. We had been listened to, I think at that point, in almost 30 countries. That's amazing to me. You know, yeah. And then now I look at it, we're 24 episodes in, we're at like over 30,000 listens. I think we're in 34 countries or 35 countries, Nepal, South Africa. Like, it's crazy. It's crazy. Indonesia.
Qatar. Come on, tell me some Filipinos are listening to
There's no
that.
Filipinos. I haven't seen the
No,
Philippines once. I haven't seen the Philippines once. But where it started for me was funny because I talked about a person that was in international news at the time in Australia in one of my episodes. And then I checked my metrics and it was like 7 people reached in Australia. And I was like, oh man, that's so cool. And then all of a sudden it spread to the UK. And then it was in Nepal. And then the rest of Europe, Eastern Europe. And I was like, wow, man. So for me, that is mind blowing. The fact that
yeah,
I have been able to do this and reach so many people. That's big to me. The other thing is really, it's a testament to when you do the work and you do the research that you can pull something off. You know me, man. This has been rattling around in my head for over a year before I launched it. Meeting people like you, and seeing your Facebook Live show, the Golden Mike Live, was a big impetus for me to actually get going and get this thing started, because I saw elements in your show that really spoke to me, and it added this layer of creativity in my head where I was like, all right, cool. I think there are elements here that I didn't think of before that could be really influential for me if I put them into the show in terms of influencing my audience and really, engaging them. And I did the work, man. It was 6 months of researching podcast hosts, researching equipment, researching other podcasts to see popularity versus metrics versus show types, versus genres, and trying to pick my genre. Looking at people like Howard Stern, who's my hero in communications, and looking at his interview style and really breaking it down and analyzing the parts that speak to me, that I could use in my interview style. Man, did I do the work. Man, did I do the work. And then when I was finally ready to go and pull the trigger on purchasing equipment, it was about 30 days before I had a live podcast going, and I had done a couple of pre-shows too, just to test out my voice and test out my equipment. Right.
Yeah. It was fun watching that process, go from like soup to nuts basically. And, you really skyrocketed up. The other question I want to ask you is, what is the most surprising thing that you've gotten from this podcast experience?
Same thing. The first answer, the metrics.
Okay.
The metrics, and on top of that, the sponsorships. I had a goal going into this. After all of my research and knowing my audience size, knowing that I am a very small fleck and modest fleck in the world of public figures, that I'm very regional, that I'm not a national public figure yet. My goal was, by 10 months into the podcast, knowing that I would be doing it once a week, my goal was to be averaging 100 downloads a week at that point. I had 100 downloads a minimum by my first episode. Minimum. And then you're talking about, like, I've really been averaging over 1,000 downloads and listens per episode. And so to see that and then have sponsors approach me, that blew my mind.
Yeah. That's amazing. I would say the number one thing for me was my number one goal was moving away from the live show, because sometimes when you do something so long, it'll start getting stale and you don't reveal parts of your personality. Mm-hmm. And I saw this as an opportunity for, instead of the sort of court jester Marc that's always joking around, to be able to show a much more, I wouldn't say rounded, but kind of keep the edge, but also bring the wisdom. And one of the things that I did start getting back was, when I moved over from the live to the podcast, I was very fortunate that my audience moved with me. And the feedback that I got was exactly the person who I saw on the inside, not the caricature who was playing a role in the lives. And that has been an impetus for not only expansion with some of the things going on with my business, some of the things going on with the Joy Revolution, but also just some straight up confidence in terms of, Hey man, in my previous show, I was definitely a people pleaser. I didn't question people. I wasn't critical about some of the things that the guests said. And now I'm coming back, and I feel like I can sit in the seat of the audience member who's like, man, you should be asking this question right now because this guy said something totally whack, and you're sitting here nodding your head, and so to know my audience and grow with them, and to also have the agency to go and ask that difficult question has really helped with the know, like, and trust factor. I know it's been used over and over and over again, but it's really helped with that one person who's been like, man, I've been following him for a while, and I think it's time that I give him a ring and see if I want to work with him or be a part of his group. And I think that's one of the coolest things.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah,
I know that my voice, and when I say my voice on the podcast, I'm not just talking about my actual voice coming out of my mouth. I mean the personality, the tone, all of it. I know that
yeah.
my voice has been developed through the years, and particularly in these last couple of years because of my public speaking, because of the coaching that I do. Did you find that, I know that you're a public speaker as well, did you find that the 200 plus Golden Mike episodes, Golden Mike live episodes that you did before you launched the Golden Mike podcast helped you to develop the voice that you knew could not only engage people, but really hit home the content?
Yes and no. When you do something 200 times, you're bound to get a little bit better at it, right? There's muscle memory to that. One of the things that, if I could go back and rewind, was sort of, there's three pillars that I stand on. One is this empowerment tip. Number two is this wisdom, and number three is kind of some levity and energy. And the thing was that I didn't truly honor that on that show. Um, I think when someone comes in clear, maybe it definitely would have helped if I would have had like a coach or someone that could bounce ideas off of which I do have now. I have people listen to the podcast, and initially they were like, nah, that's not you. Oh, that is so you. That is so Marc behind the scenes. And that's a much more full, refreshing Marc. It's not always a predictable one-liner that he's going to throw in there, right? Um, uh, I think hard work is hard work, but you're not actually going to grow if you're not putting in a growth mindset to be like, okay, how can I get better? How can I put the sort of wisdom piece in it? How can I ground this a little bit more? How can I
Right.
get feedback from people? I do think that and you don't have to do it in 200 episodes. I think one of the ways that you can accelerate it is by recording it, practicing it, listening to your recordings, and getting feedback from people. Your audience is the best informant that you could ever use, and a lot of times you don't get feedback from the audience. A lot of people will do their podcast and they'll be like, "Did you like it?" And that's it.
Yeah.
And versus, what'd you think about it? Oh, it was good here. It was good here. Well, what can I do to make that better? And I think that there's a couple things there. I also think that going into a terminal degree in university helped me out quite a bit. Before I was a coach, I was doing research on a regular basis, doing qualitative interviews with people. And in qualitative interviews, you're completely objective. You have either a structured or no structure. And what I loved is a semi-structure, structured interview protocol where you come in, you think you have an idea of where the game plan is going to go, but then you get this feeling where, I know what the through line is to this, and
Right.
I'm going to follow that through line to the end. It sounds like you have that as well.
Oh,
Like you get that
absolutely.
feeling, right? And so to really start to merge things in my life, like education and and some of the marketing things and coaching and coaching questions, and also deviating from coaching questions, deviating from a semi-structured protocol, improvising when need to be, having having the energy to stand and just be quiet during a podcast can be so powerful when someone is telling a story.
Yeah.
And so those are little bits and pieces that I picked up from lecturing and other things. But at the end of the day, when you put all those, that's the preparation. The actual performance piece for me is kind of like what we're doing right now, G. Like, it's just like having a cup of coffee with a buddy.
Yeah.
And really not paying attention to the impact this is going to have on the audience. And if you're engaged and you're energetic and you're feeling it and you're into it, there's bound to be other people who are going to be fascinated by it.
Absolutely.
I mean, those guys who are fascinated in caves, if they were boring, I would not be looking up those creatures that live in caves with like no eyeballs and stuff like that. Like, I wouldn't have been doing that for 3 days afterwards. We really have this power to fascinate when we tap into it and know what about us is fascinating.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And to that note, I think that those that know Marc and I, whether in our public speaking, our businesses, or our coaching, know that we are really thick-headed about being here for the right reasons. We
bullish
are
even.
Very bullish, very, very bullish. I look at my students, my clients when I'm coaching, and I try and evolve as a coach. I try and look at what I'm giving them, and if they are able to take that information and not only process it, but to execute. That's one of the most important things for me. And so when I launched the Leadership Experience, my coaching masterclass platform, the core class being all about teaching the concepts of leadership and how to implement that in your life in order to attain your mission statement, what you're about as a human being. And then, of course, the add-on tracks for the Leadership Experience are about now implementing them into your professional life. The Career Leader track is about implementing your leadership into your career. Entrepreneurship track into your business, and the Public Thought Leader track into your career as a public thought leader, a speaker, a writer, a social influencer, an activist. And there was something that I knew when I built this that was missing, something that another platform that we could provide. And through some intense collaboration, Marc and I were able to decide that adding a podcasting track would be something that would be super helpful to those with a voice that didn't want to get on a stage, to those with a voice that were specifically leaning towards a platform like this. And so we developed the podcast experience, which is not only an add-on track to the Leadership Experience, but of course a standalone class as well. And it is awesome.
Part of the reason why I'm here is because it's freaking awesome. And also because the work that I do in the Joy Revolution is getting our clients to declare what about their lives, the revolution in their lives that they want to lead, the social change they want to lead using positive emotions. People usually think of revolutions being these upheavals that are violent, where we can have very I wouldn't say peaceful, but provocative ways of bringing about change. Yeah, I would say peaceful. Provocative ways of bringing about change in the world. And what better way to garner champions? What better way to influence and bring that revolution out, but through a podcast? It's a natural extension for anyone who's passionate about something, anyone who wants to, through leadership, influence someone else's behavior in a positive way. I am. Now I've gone through a couple podcast training classes, George, and what we've come up with to serve the people who want to take this class I think is nothing like I've seen. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, what was so unique about this is how the idea for the class was born. Okay? So I was
Mm.
developing the first cohort of the leadership experience. Marc had launched yet another cohort of the Joy Revolution, and he had asked me to guest coach as a speaking and writing coach within that cohort. And I was learning so much, not only by coaching people and finding my voice as a coach, but now watching how Marc coached within the Joy Revolution and really tying together execution and theory. Marc's a big
Mm.
theory guy. Why are you doing what you're doing? While I am very good at helping somebody to execute in their purpose, which is
Yeah.
what the leadership experience is about. And so all of the sudden we were gelling so well. And these two
Yeah.
different, not styles, because we have very complementary styles. These two thought processes, they just worked so well together. And we knew that not only some of our cohort members, but other people out there could really benefit from learning how to build a podcast the right way. Now, some of these courses, not to knock any other courses, but some of them, and most of them, they're going to offer you the idiot's guide to podcasting in not so many words,
Yeah.
right?
And I wanted to throw this right way out for a second. When we developed this course, the right way for one person isn't the right way for another.
Correct.
So the basis of the course is everyone is going to come out with the outcome of they have either a plan or they've already executed a podcast series that they are proud of, and one that draws in listeners. That's what we consider the right way. And then all the steps in between is coloring the colors you want to color in. It's not template. It really is a deep dive into what are your inner motivations? What are your what are your kind of shadow challenging parts that you don't want to reveal? What are the parts that you might be oversharing? And really walking you through soup to nuts, from equipment to hosting to different types of podcasts, even to coaching in the live, with if you are doing an interview or you're doing a solo podcast, all those different things in a live workshop. This baby's not pre-recorded, and so what gets developed in this cohort is going to be a result of the people in the cohort influencing each other.
Yes.
And anyone who's ever been a part of a live cohort before knows that everyone is an influencer and everyone is influenced by the cohort.
We're big community guys. We are
insane.
big community guys. That's what we build our coaching platforms around, our community. But I want to hit on very specifically what I spoke about before, Marc being a big theory guy, me being a big purpose guy. When you look at your favorite podcast, your favorite radio shows, ask yourself one question. When I look at the Howard Stern Show, my favorite radio show, do I listen to the Howard Stern Show because he knows how to operate his soundboard? Is that the big accomplishment? That he was able to operate his soundboard and to patch through all the other members of the team and successfully transmit across an antenna? That is not why I listen to him. I listen to him because he is a masterful interviewer. He is an entertaining human being, and I am very interested in what he has to say, and that's because he is so skilled at showing me through his voice what he has to offer. That's what we're teaching here. Will you get the tech specs? Yeah, of course you will. Come on.
Yeah.
Come on. We're not going to build a class without showing you how to do it.
Exactly. But really what I would be hard pressed for folks to look around and see a class that in the live coaches each individual, where an audience is watching, on finding their voice or honing their voice and honing the craft. That at the end is really what's going to get the super fans, the people who are going to be like, say the tagline, say this. That at the end is really going to be the difference. You know, those are the hey nows, and you've said enough.
You said it up. You said it all.
You've said it all. And it does take practice to get there, but also at the same time, why do 200 episodes by yourself in trying to learn that when you can be in a group that can accelerate this process quite quickly? I mean, we're talking about exponential acceleration right now.
Exponential. And I'm so excited to get this started. I look at, you mentioned before, one of the things that has surprised me. You talk about super fans here. I have two super fans that are going to be my super fans for life, my kids. And one of the things that they love about my show, now they're not allowed to listen to my show because daddy gets a little, daddy's language is a little rough sometimes when he gets passionate, but they know my intro. They know my outro. They know my theme song. Parts of the show that when I was in the design phase that I worked very hard on, very, very hard on. The timing of it, the drops that were involved in editing the sounds, the whole thing. When I was editing a show the other day over the weekend on my laptop, and of course I'm now editing in my intro and the whole deal, the little part, if you've heard my podcast before, the Launchcast, the part in the beginning comes up with the announcement that at this time I'd like everybody to take a seat, and they start mouthing it. And then the claps come on, and they're clapping at the same spots. The woo comes on, the music hits, they're singing the lyrics they knew my intro by heart, and these are not even people that listen to my show.
Yeah.
I imagined a level of success where the show comes on in somebody's car that is a fan, and they have committed their precious time enough to know that in their head, to have memorized my intro. That kind of thing blows me away. To have that kind of commitment from a complete stranger, that means you're affecting people, and that's what this thing is about.
Yeah, and the commitment from the complete stranger is a reflection of the commitment to the podcaster themselves, to showing up. And George, I'm totally stoked to run full speed and beyond with you on this podcast experience. How do we get in touch with you? What do we do now for the next steps?
So here we go. We are right now in open cart mode. Enrollment is open. As of May 15th, it has been open. So you are going to visit theleadershipexp.com. theleadershipexp.com. And anywhere on that site, you'll find the links, particularly if you click on the courses tab. It's going to bring up all of the open courses for enrollment coming up in the next cohort, which starts on June 1st. You can click on the Leadership Experience Core Class Plus podcast track or the standalone podcast experience track. You can enroll right there. Within 24 hours of enrollment and payment, you will have been registered on the site, and the curriculum will be available to you. We start the week of June 1st. It is a 6-week course, both core and the add-on tracks. 6 weeks. So we're talking about the add-on track in particular for podcasting is once a week, an hour and a half a week, 6 weeks long, plus some one-on-one coaching that's thrown in there. And you will be able to walk away from this, if you choose to apply and execute, with a working podcast show.
That's it. Anyone who's worked with George and or I, and especially the combination of George and I, know the tremendous amount of support that we give to helping you get to where it is that you want to go. That is another bonus, is you have both of us there to work with you on if there's individual needs that you have going into the podcast. Now, do you have a sign out? I've already forgotten if you have a sign out for your show.
We do. It's simple.
It's time for both of us to do our sign outs.
It's simple. I want you to do yours because I have the more elaborate intro. I think you have the more elaborate sign out. So.
Okay. So I'm going to do the sign out for my podcast, and it's this: for your sake, for my sake, for crap's sake, start your revolution. And if you want to amplify it, do it through a podcast. We invite you to be a part of this podcast experience. TheLeadershipEXP.com.
This episode is sponsored by the June 2020 cohort of The Leadership Experience, a coaching masterclass hosted by yours truly, the Launchpad himself, George Andriopoulos. I am bringing you yet another cohort of our 6-week intensive masterclass on leadership. You will find your purpose, you will carry it through into your personal mission statement, and you will use that mission statement to change the game. And that's what this is all about. Now, we still have our 3 add-on tracks, our career leader track, our entrepreneur track, and our popular public thought leader track for speakers, writers, social influencers. You know the deal. But guess what? We have added a 4th add-on track, and it is our most robust track yet. The podcast experience track, which is co-developed and co-taught by my man, Marc Cordon, from the Joy Revolution, from the Golden Mike podcast. We have teamed up into the Super Friends of Podcasting, and we are about to break down some walls and teach our leaders how to build a podcast of their own. But it is not just the technical stuff. No. This is much deeper. It is the deep dive into interviewing, into guest relations, into reaching your audience, into using your leadership to carry your mission through into your podcast message. Let's do this. The cohort starts June 1st. Registration is open. TheLeadershipEXP.com. Get there. Tell them I sent you.